I was 13 years old and I still went by Mary Morrow when I stood in front of the pumpkin house with my friends. I clung to my boyfriend's arm as we stood in line. I knew that I wasn't welcome back to Lockhart anymore by decree of Adonse, the All Heart of Lockhart. I knew that the pumpkin house was considered as part of Adonse's territory, but I had hope. I wasn't allowed back to Lockhart, but the pumpkin house was technically on Earth, and in the center of this year's pumpkin house was a grander prize than most years. There was a wish in the center of the haunted house. Anyone who made it to the center of it all would get their wish granted, and I knew from experience no one of the Allhart family ever did things part way. If there was a wish in the center of the haunted house, it would be a powerful wish, something that likely exceeded the petty power fantasies of my friends. I stood in line with my boyfriend, Valero. He grabbed my hand and I tightened my grip, and a costumed performer came by, a stilt walker who stood 4 meters tall and who was dressed like a skeleton. Valero wrapped his arm around my shoulders like he was going to protect me from the costumed creep. But it wasn't the costume that unsettled me, it was the fact that they were one of Adonse's employees. I feared being asked to leave. I would never make my way to the center of the pumpkin house if they never let me inside. Still, though, when we arrived where the docent handed out the tickets, I felt my heart flutter as the docent took coins from the guests and handed out the tickets. The docent had no eyes, only empty sockets, but with practiced ease, he counted out coins and passed out the tickets. Valero went first, and then I went, paying my centime forward. The docent passed the ticket to me. I took a sigh of relief as I stepped in to join my friends, before the docent grabbed my hand and he whispered to me, "Prize in the center cannot be claimed by you. If you see her, you will not be able to speak to her. She extends her hospitality to you because she does so to everyone. That does not mean you are forgiven, lost child," the docent said before he let go of my hand, and I ran to join my friends. I sat with my friends, and while we listened to Medusa explain the backstory of the Deadlands Desert, I laid my hand on Valero's shoulder while I listened, and next to me, Mercy Love lays her own shoulder on Marai's shoulder. A double date into the pumpkin house. I shared the story with everyone. Mercy was the one who found out how to get to Autumn County. Now here we were, watching a woman with a bronze mask tell her story, while her sisters helped out with the play, acting out the many roles of the play while Medusa acted her own part out, and everyone listened to the play so they understood the backstory of this part of the pumpkin house. If we wanted to go deeper, we would go even further into the Deadlands for the way in, and for now we just listened. When the play finished, even though Medusa was wearing her mask, I couldn't help but feel like her eyes were on me with her final words. As the curtain fell, I heard Valero scoff as he said, "Dumbass, I never would have made Poseidon's mistake," he said as I turned to him and I kissed him beneath his ear before I asked, "What do you mean by that?" I asked him as he kissed me back, leaving that as his only answer. "We have a lot of games we can play here. Want to win some games before we head further into the desert?" Marai asked, and Valero said, "Hell yeah," as Mercy Love and I agreed. Marai would want to win us all prizes because that was the kind of person they were. They would head into the cafeteria early to make sure that we all had an extra slice of cake. If that cake had to be stolen, they would not hesitate. Valero would win me a prize because he liked showing off, and because he liked giving me gifts to show me that he cared about me. Mercy Love would probably just like to play the games, and as for me, I think I was still in a bit of a shock because I was not thinking much about the games. As we passed by the many stalls, as Mirai paused at each stand for a moment before moving on to the next one. It wasn't just examining the stall to see if the game looked fun or not. Mirai had the ability to see up to a minute into the future, but otherwise they had no real extraordinary power. The only clue to the source of their power was the fact that their right eye was half golden and half brown, and their left eye was half green and half brown. They were possibly a grandchild or great grandchild of the golden eyed child, hence their ability to see into the near future. So they were looking into the future of each stall to see if it would be worth their time to try and win the game, or if they would need to head elsewhere. Carnival games don't exactly have a good reputation for being winnable. A lot of them were famously unbeatable, and even with the law changes in the exoteric world, did not mean that the esoteric world had to play fair. On the other hand, knowing Adonse, every game here would be fair. On the first hand, though, Mirai would not be satisfied with fair. They'd want the grand prize. In one of the random stalls, with many rounder balls, Mirai stopped, and they smiled when they saw the grand prize. A large stuffed animal, a dark blue horse with equally dark blue eyes, an equally dark blue horn, and a white moon on its hip and on its neck. A cartoon character I did not recognize. None of the horses in the stall I recognized from any cartoon, although that did not mean much. It had been years since I saw any cartoons, and there was a real possibility this cartoon wasn't from our universe. The attendant wore a white and blue striped shirt with matching pants and shoes, along with a straw hat, despite the cool evening air, and he had a big, bushy mustache. Hey there, good fella! Welcome to my little stall. We have fresh prizes from the autumn country. Each one of our prizes stuffed full of the longing of the children who gave them up. I see you're eyeing Princess Luna. And while you do have good taste, I implore you, my sharp-eyed friend, aim for another grand prize should you win. I have a nightmare moon that's perfect for your devilish girl. Hey! Mercy yelled, hiding behind her turtleneck even more. If you don't want dark and despondent, I have a daybreaker, shimmer, and glimmer, he said, pointing towards other horses while Mirai shook their head. I want to win that one, they said, pointing towards Princess Luna. And the barker sighed as he handed the tactician a single ball. All you need to do is hit that target there. Any prize it knocks down is yours to keep, he said, pointing at the target next to the large horse that looked impossible for Mirai to hit. I should have known that Mirai had a plan. Just to clarify, anything that gets knocked down with my throw is something I get to keep? Mirai asked as the attendant nodded reluctantly, and we all knew something was going to happen because of the way they smiled. They were usually smiling, but when they smiled like that, like they were about to sing, we knew that it was going to be something interesting. They took the rounder ball in their hand and they threw it overhand, where it bounced off the target next to the large stuffed animal, before bouncing off one of the posts holding the ceiling of the stall up, and it collided with another target, next to a purple and green bipedal dragon. Both stuffed animals fell as the attendant chuckled. Clever job there. I've never seen anyone knock down two prizes before, he said, before placing the two stuffed animals aside. Do we get them now? Mirai asked, and the attendant shook his head. No, they get delivered when you leave. That way you don't overload yourself with prizes. The only prize that's collected inside of the pumpkin house is the prize in the center, the attendant said, and Mirai's smile changed. It was no longer a genuine smile. I don't suppose you can tell us how we're supposed to get through the Deadlands Desert? Mirai asked, and the attendant shook his head. Sorry, I'm not allowed to, even if I did know. And I don't know, he said with a shrug, and Mary believed him. As the friends walked away, we all began to talk more seriously. Should we play more games, or should we try to head further into the Deadlands? Mercy asked. Well, there is little out here worth playing for. Some stuffed animals and some treats from the stalls. But the big stuff's on the next level, Valero said, cracking his knuckles. Ready to fight. He knew that you weren't supposed to fight in the pumpkin house, but you could if you understood that meant they could fight back too. And Valero, like a lot of men, figured he was more powerful than a threat he hadn't seen yet. Well, I do want to play here for a while longer. Maybe see about getting some apple cider from the Headless Horseman, Mirai suggested, pointing to where a sign said, "Free cider," and where a headless figure handed out cups upon cups of apple cider. The cider they serve in the Leviathan lands are alcoholic, Mercy Love said, absent-mindedly, while she also fiddled with a little bottle that was on her necklace. A gift from her father, I knew that much, but I did not know why she loved it so much. Mirai and Valero began to talk about the kinds of alcohol they could get in the Leviathan lands. Alcohol isn't allowed back in Agamemnon's Academy for Accelerated Apprenticeship, but that didn't stop children from drinking it. It just meant that the alcohol had to come from a teacher or another student, rather than from the cafeteria. I could tell from Mercy's expression that she wasn't saying what the next area having alcohol was a way of saying it was better. He didn't drink, and even if her companion did, and realizing she was trying to hide inside of her sweater, I spoke up. Why don't Mercy and I go get some cider, and you two can figure out where we go to find Medusa? I asked, and Valero nodded and waved off with one hand, while he and Mirai were talking about to unlock a new sword in the game Hasselstein. While we made our way to the Headless Horseman, I turned to Mercy while we stood in line. I don't quite understand what it is you want in the center of the maze. I know Valero told me he was going to wish for a way to bring me home, and I know that Mirai wants power over the past, not just the future. I cannot claim the prize, but what drives you to the pumpkin house? I thought somewhere like this would be uncomfortable for you. After I finished, she slipped her sleeves further down so even her hands were hidden before she spoke. I am too kind, I am too honest, I am too fragile. Something that my father definitely would never understand. I am tired, Mary. Far more tired than you know. I am tired of trying to be a success. It's against my very nature. Agamemnon's success isn't just winning, it's making everyone else lose. How we have to harden our hearts just to survive in a selfish world. How we have to be selfish to survive. How we have to be greedy to be good, because greed drives people to innovate. My heart is just too weak to survive as it is, and the guilt is too much. The power I seek in the center of the pumpkin house is one that doesn't answer to my father, and one that is great enough to help me. Few gods would speak to me, and fewer still would give me something without. She looked down at her wrist, where a pentagram was peeking out. Without trying to make you into a weapon like Medusa, I finished for her, and she nodded as she stared into the bottle around her neck. The pumpkin house is the only way I might be able to get rid of this. The only way I can let the guilt go. I cannot order it away. I cannot destroy it. I'm always carrying it with me, and it only grows heavier, she said with a sigh, as it was finally our turn for the apple cider. The figure lowered the tray, and we grabbed our cups, along with the extras for both Mirai and Valero. Thank you, said to the headless figure, as we both went back to our dates. Manners were a very important lesson in both Adulting 101 and Economica of Crime. Being polite and civil allowed you to get a lot further than being rude. Plus, as Mr. Blue loved to explain, being nice wasn't the same thing as being good. It cost us nothing to be polite to the Headless Horseman, and if anything, it would help shield us from breaking any Fey rules. Back with the others, we all drank the cider, and Valero explained what he learned. So, The Deadlands began just beyond the edge of the market. We have to make it past an area full of made monsters to make it to the Deadlands. I guess it's a museum or something. While there, we have to watch out for the Gorgons and their families. While only Medusa can turn us to stone, they all look identical, so we don't know who, if any of them, are safe to look at. Valero explained as we made our way to the beginning of the Deadlands. And despite myself, I couldn't help but look at the art pieces that we passed. Sculptures of stone in truly intricate detail. Every statue had different expressions of terror, and at their feet were plaques that explained who the figures were. Some of them were people, but most of them were monsters, or heroes. The first one we passed was a large bat with a vaguely humanoid shape that stood at least 3 meters tall. Tied around its neck was a rope necklace that held 3 human skulls. Skulls that too were made of stone, and as we got close, we saw that the sculpture had a lot of detail. I could see stone saliva dripping from the fangs, and flecks of what I assume was stone blood on the claws. Plaque told me that this was a strigoi from Wallachia. This one specifically was once called Justina. She was the seventh daughter of her family, and she was asked by her mother to lie to a judge to protect the family. Justina was executed by the court, and after her death, she haunted her village and killed everyone inside by drinking their blood, milk, and wheat, while depriving the village of water. And now Justina haunts the Deadland Desert, which is a desert because she keeps it from raining. Many get a mental note she seemed a bit similar to a vampire, but the sculpture was a lot scarier than the long-collared, anemic sex idols that television led me to think that they were. The sculpture after the strigoi was something different. There was a sculpture of another woman in a long dress with 2 large feathery wings on her back. In most other circumstances, she might have been called an angel, if it wasn't for one very distinct detail: her face. Angels don't reveal their faces. This woman was clearly crying, and her teeth in her mouth too sharp. The plaque said her name was Mole, and it said that she was once a servant of Persephone. But when Persephone disappeared, Demeter gave her the power of flight. However, when it was discovered that Persephone was now in Hades' realm, Demeter punished all the servants of Persephone. Now they hunt on the shorelines along the Central Sea, using their voices to tempt sailors and travelers to drown themselves before the sirens eat them. Another exile who was turned into a monster was now far more dangerous than they were before. And they weren't the only statues we passed, although I did not look over the plaques this time. I saw lycanthropes who stood on their back legs, who snarled and had stone foam over their mouths, and even though I didn't read their plaques, I did remember that most werewolves were also once people, turned into beasts against their will, either by curse or by being eaten by another werewolf. I saw a long-necked serpent that resembled a plesiosaur, but with dog heads along her body and a long lizard-like tail, and her head loomed over us. Even in stone, it felt like the monster Scylla could easily have swooped down and consumed us in an instant. So we continued, and when we crested the hill, we could see Deadlands Desert. We all stood there in silence when we saw it. We could see the exit. A distant, oversized gate separated us from the Leviathan lands, but it wasn't the gate that bothered us. It was everything between us and the gate. There were rows upon rows of statues of different people and monsters, all turned to stone. Hundreds or even thousands of them. I feel this is our last chance to turn back, I said to the group. They turned to the gate to the Leviathan lands. We made our way down the path as we passed more statue. These ones we passed were all of people screaming in silent terror. No plaques this time, no names, nothing to commemorate those who died in the Deadlands. These are all the people who Medusa killed, I said as I brushed my hand on a statue. The stone was warm, too warm. The statue was of a knight with eyes that looked familiar. I stared into those stone eyes, trying to figure out why it felt familiar, when the eyes moved beneath the stone helmet, and I fell to my back, grabbing the Rethin device in my hand for a moment, my heart pounding and my spine tingling as I stared at the statue. The beard, the eyes, the divot in his hands. He was my father, a man I haven't seen in so many years, but here he was, looking like how I left him, but now he was stone and dressed like a knight. What the hell did that mean? Why would Adonse let something like this happen? Run, was whispered from my father's stone lips, and when I heard that, I also heard slithering among the stones. My first instinct was to face where I heard the slithering, but knowing what I knew about Medusa, instead I turned to where my friends were, only to see that they were all turned to stone as well. Mirai pointed behind me, their face in terror. Valero was turned to run, and he turned to stone halfway through a run, so his balance was precarious. And Mercy's face was one of curiosity. They were all turned to stone, and I was the only one left. For a moment, I was frozen, not sure what to do, when I heard my father's voice again, but it was no longer just from one statue. Run! The statue said in my father's voice. So I turned from the slithering noise and I ran towards the distant gate. Maybe I could get out and find a way to turn them back human? I don't know what I was thinking. All I knew was that I heard the voices saying, "Run," over and over as I kept running towards the gate. Although after nearly a minute of running, I stopped when I realized I kept hearing the words "run," but I didn't hear the slithering anymore. So why were the statues telling me to run? In fact, why would the statues tell me to run even if they could speak? There was no benefit to them if I escaped Medusa, and if they were truly aware, they wouldn't want others to escape when they didn't. Misery loves company. That is one of the axioms of the world. When you suffer and you don't have the power to make the suffering stop, you instead seek to make others suffer. Soldiers at war will harm civilians who had nothing to do with the war. The weak would bully the weaker because they couldn't harm those that harmed them. A stressed boss would torture their underlings because they were stressed. Why would the statues try to help us? They wouldn't. And it wasn't the statues that were speaking. It defied logic. If they were turned to stone, they'd be dead. If they were enchanted and still alive, they wouldn't speak with the same voice. And if they're haunted or undead, they wouldn't speak like this. They'd speak as something else. So this was an illusion of some kind. But where could the illusion be coming from? I thought to myself for a moment, not able to focus because I heard the run over and over. As I finally had the connection I needed, as I removed my earbuds from my pocket, and I began playing music as loud as I could in my ears, and the statues stopped speaking, they all changed in shape. Now they were all roughly humanoid, but otherwise had no definite shape nor features, and they were all silent. The only noise I could hear was the beat of the drums, and I looked around for my friends. The siren's magic was not attracting people, although that was the easiest way to get people. The siren's magic was creating illusion with their song. Now I could see clearly. I could see my friends. And they were almost at the gate, and they were walking there with me? Whoever was with them wasn't me, and it wasn't a siren illusion. So I rushed between the statues to try and get back to my friends, before they left for the Leviathan lands. I don't know if I would ever see them again in the pumpkin house if they left without me, or if I would be stuck wandering the grounds until Feralia ends, or maybe forever. When I arrived at where they were, just a few meters from the gate, when I arrived, panting, and they turned my way, and I felt my heart twist in my chest when I saw the impostor cuddled up against Valero, one hand on his chest and the other on the small of his back, while his arm wrapped around her, the exact way that he held me. "You need to stop her! She's an impostor!" I yelled at the group when they turned to face me. Already I could see them all confused, and immediately Valero let go of the impostor as he turned from her to me. Mercy tilted her head as she tried to figure out who was who. It was Mirai who spoke first. "Are you a cheap impostor to try to get us to stay?" they asked me, their eyes scrutinizing every expression I made. "No, I'm not an impostor. I'm the real Mary. I got separated and something else took my place," I told the group before the impostor spoke. "Come on, you guys. Are you dumb enough to fall for that? I've been with you the entire time. You would have noticed me leave the group. After all, you're all too smart to fall for such a simple trick," she said as I saw them glance towards her, and they all scrutinized me. Oh my God. They really saw me as the imposter. "Look, it is the real me. Ask me something only the real me would know," I told the group, and it was Mercylove's turn to speak. "You messed up. There is nothing personal that Mary has ever shared with anyone. She never asked about us, and she never shared anything about herself," Mercy said as I opened my mouth to contradict her when I stopped myself. There was almost nothing that I ever shared, except that I did share a few personal details, and I had a few personal details. Things that I promised to never share with anyone under any circumstances. "Mercy, I trust you more than anyone," I told her as I saw the imposter slip up. Just a little. I saw her glancing my way as I spoke. She didn't know us. All she had was her own observations and logic, so she was observing me and my friends to try and figure out the best way to fit into the group. "Valero, Mirai, Mercy, how about this? The three of you question both of us, and then vote on who you think is the real Mercy, and then we all move on into the next area together," the imposter suggested, and before I could speak, Valero nodded. "That's a great idea. No one knows my girlfriend better than I do," he said as he looked over both of us, top to bottom. As far as I could tell, we were both physically identical, so it would come down to who could convince Valero that they were the real one. So I wasn't sure why the imposter was trying to go down the one route where they didn't know everything. "How about this? How do you feel about my powers?" he asked, and the imposter went first. "Honestly, I was always jealous of your power. It is incredibly impressive, and I know that I've said some things in the past that I've regretted about your powers, but in truth, your power is the greatest I've ever seen, and I wish they were mine," the imposter said, and I could see Valero was smiling and clearly impressed with her answer, and that broke my heart, especially since I know that was the answer Valero wanted to hear. It wasn't the answer that was correct. "And what do you think about my powers?" he asked me as I sighed, and I answered honestly. "Valero, I find your adaptability with your power impressive, but Valero, I don't like what you do to yourself to activate it. A lot of the formulas you brew are toxic or poisonous in some way. They affect your body every time you drink one, and they're incredibly habit-forming. I get the fact you need to use them to activate your power. However, the way you use it is destroying your body and mind. I don't like who you are when you use the formulas. And I don't want you to die using the power, which you are in the path of," I told him honestly, only to have the imposter interrupt. "Valero, she's lying. I would never stop loving you." I love all of you. I was just jealous, and I think deep in your heart you know that, she said as Valero pointed at the impostor. That's Mary, the other is a fake, he said, confident with his answer. And my heart broke with that statement. Did he really choose her because he thought she was telling the truth, or because he wished that was the truth? It did not matter, though, because it was now Mercy Love's chance, and she asked her question. What did you think of my family when you came over for dinner? She asked us both, and for a moment I was truly confused. Unfortunately, I did not show it. I never met her family, let alone for dinner. Pretty much everyone at school thought of Mercy Love as a child of hippies from Kimru. They never realized that her father was the devil, and they never saw the brands that covered her skin because she kept them hidden behind long sleeves all year round. And thankfully for me, the imposter went first again. I think your family is just so lovely. I can see where you get your incredible personality and your amazing smile from, she said, and Mercy bristled in a very subtle way, but I could see it from years of being her friend. You're not Mary. You're absolutely an imposter. Mary has never met my family, and if she did, she never would have called them lovely. My father is a fucking monster, and no one who had met him would ever call him anything else, she said with certainty as the impostor tried to cover for herself. I was being polite, Mercy. Please don't leave me trapped here just because I tried to be nice, she said as Mercy shook her head and turned away, looking towards the gate leading out now, and now it was Mirai's turn. Okay, so here's a question only Mary can answer. In Economica of Crime 101, we are taught that it's better to steal money instead of objects because most goods can be purchased at the right price. And if you steal the goods, then it actually makes it hard to guarantee that goods will still be generated. But in Economica of Crime 102, we are also taught the principle of slicing, that if what we steal is less than what the store is expected to lose through broken goods or shoplifting, we can use it as a way to resupply without having to spend money or stealing money. How do you reconcile the theory of fungible assets along with the theory of slicing? They asked, and the impostor only stared at silence at them before she finally spoke. What the fuck does any of that even mean? It's clear you're just making up something stupid to make this impostor say something, the impostor said, and I answered the question with ease. Fungibility theory dictates that an asset that is lighter and usable in more forms is far more valuable than an asset that can be used in less forms and weighs more. Stealing a car is a lot harder than stealing keys. Stealing all the money in a bank is a lot harder than stealing account numbers. And yet having the keys or the account number is just as valuable as the car or the money in the bank. And because they are lighter and easier to steal, their value is increased because of that fact that it is fungible rather than something that can slow you down. The concept of slicing is based on the idea that many small assets can be obtained easily, and if it is done so gradually or through multiple sources, that it can create a lot of assets that would normally have been lost, broken, or simply ignored. You can send a rounding errors amount of money into your check payday by payday, allowing yourself to gain a great deal of wealth, or you can take a candy bar from a box that has hundreds and most people wouldn't never notice. Or, to use the example of car keys, you can make copies of every key in a parking lot, and when a car gets bought, you can walk up to the car days, weeks, or even months later and just drive the car away, all without being noticed. Slicing complies with fungible theory because even though the small slices are nearly worthless by themselves, they are incredibly fungible, and their value only increases as slices add up. I finished with my monologue, and with a smile, it was unsaid who the real Mary Morrow was. Goodbye, imposter. I'm heading with my friends. I said as the imposter pulled one final trick to avoid us from leaving the Deadlands desert. Her face turned to me and it twisted. Her smile grew wider and wider as her teeth grew even longer and longer, and her hair started to hiss. "Run! She's Medusa!" I yelled at the others, who made it through the gate as I turned away from her, and I tried to run where I remembered the gate was, only to feel her claws grab my arm, and she lifted me off the ground. "What makes you think he cares about you any more than Poseidon cared about me?" she whispered with her foul breath as I kept my eyes closed, trying to refuse to answer Medusa's question. "Answer my question, exile! You are less than flowers beneath Alice's footsteps, and yet you walk through these lands with no fear. Why should he care about you?" she asked again, and I answered, "You will never understand love, monster, so you'd never understand that he cares for me," I told her, and her tone turned from harsh to very gentle. "Oh, sweet child, I understand love very well. I understand the pain. I understand the way love makes you bleed. I understand why the arrow can make you feel or make you numb. Tell me, is he your arrow because he makes you feel or because he makes you numb?" Medusa asked me, and for the first time that night, I had no answer. "You can avoid your fate. Stay with us tonight, and we can scare those who walk by. Forget your wish, forget your love, forget your heart, and you will never bleed. You will never be a hero. You will never be a tragedy. Let me take your place. Let me into the Leviathan lands," Medusa offered me, and for a moment I was tempted, because I remembered her story, but I also remembered the wish in the center of it all, the reason I was going through it all, the reason why I was with Valero. I need to get to the center. If I'm not with Valero, he won't wish for me to go home, I told her, and I heard Medusa sigh. "Sweet, innocent child. When a man has that much power over you, why would he ever let it go willingly? Power you don't use is power you don't have. As far as he is concerned, you are powerless and dependent on him. If you depend on him to do the right thing, you will be a tragedy far before you're a hero," Medusa warned me, and I asked her, "Let me go. I need to be with my friends. I need to be with the ones I love," I told her as she sat me down and she sighed. "Little Alice, wanderer among Fae, exile to Earth, you could have been the greatest of us all without this tragedy. And although it pains me to see you go down this path, I will not interfere with free will. Make your choices and embrace your fate," she said before she slithered away. And when I was certain, I opened my eyes, only to see that her golden mask, made to resemble her face, was left behind. I picked it up, noticing it felt a lot lighter than a golden mask should weigh. I slid it into my backpack as I made my way to the gates, where I could hear the knocks and pounding of my friends on the other side, all trying to get to me. I pushed the gate open, and I made my way into the Leviathan lands, and despite my best efforts, I could not look Valero in the eyes. Not when he wrapped his hands around me, and when we turned to the speaker of the Leviathan lands, a man with one hand and a sword.